Good Boy Galaxy is a side-scrolling platformer that was developed for the Game Boy Advance quite recently. It follows Maxwell, a space dog whose homeworld is nearing collapse, who decides to visit other planets and take on quests to help the people, all the while making new friends who aid him along the way. The most striking aspect of the game is no doubt the presentation, which offers vibrant and lush levels to explore, as well as an extremely comedic script that lends the game a light-hearted nature as you travel throughout the solar system. When it comes to gameplay, this is where Good Boy Galaxy is at its best, and each planet is made up of 3 different gates that you must pass through in order to explore the whole area. Of course, occupying each level are various enemies that make this task all the more challenging, but thankfully Maxwell has got many different ways of taking care of business. You've got your standard jump, a booster pack and a shield, as well as the use of a weapon that all have a role to play. What mixes it up, however, is that by passing through one of the gates, one of your abilities will get taken away. This forces the player to switch up their strategies and ensures that no one level is the same. You have to go back and forth a lot during the adventure to unlock everything, but overall it is quite straightforward. There is never a time where you're at a loss for where you need to go next, because each planet has indicators that tell you when to return to a certain region or gate in order to accomplish something new. Although pre-orders are up on the First Press Games website to get a physical copy of the game, it is possible to grab a ROM, so if you can't wait to play it, emulation is the way to go. Boo's Fury is the 3rd Legend of Goku game that released for the Game Boy Advance and brings to the table a huge action RPG for fans of the series to digest, as well as enough unique ideas and gameplay mechanics for newcomers to enjoy as well. The story is simple and follows the Dragon Ball Z saga, starting at the Afterlife tournament leading up to the final battle with Kid Buu. For those familiar with the plot, you should know what to expect, but the game does a good job of adding a few new elements that make the game last a bit longer and further enhance the overall narrative. In terms of gameplay, with it being an RPG, leveling up and improving your character's abilities are front and center, and there's a lot to experiment with, may that be new skills or attributes like strength and agility, or the various pieces of equipment that augment your abilities. The minute-to-minute fighting sees you performing a series of basic moves, with A to attack and B to shoot a ki blast. On top of this, you get 2 special moves, such as Spirit Bombs and Kamehamehas, that have the power to completely decimate anyone unlucky enough to be in its path. Instead of just randomly leveling up like in the previous games, you now also get the option to allocate your stat points as you see fit, and this alone is a massive improvement, allowing the player to freely grow each character as they wish. The only thing that lets it down though is the lack of any real difficulty throughout the game. It's just way too easy to simply power your way through each fight, and it would have been nice to have seen a bit more variation when it comes to the way enemies pile on. Despite that though, Boo's Fury is still a great little adventure, and it's well worth the price of admission or a download if you're looking to emulate. No doubt, like many of you watching, whilst growing up I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee, mainly after being introduced to Dragon, a Bruce Lee story on the Super Nintendo, which would quickly become one of my favourite games on the system. Fast forward a few years, a sort of spiritual successor to that game would find a home on the Game Boy Advance that offered up a much improved experience in terms of gameplay as well as visuals that made it the perfect game for any fan of the martial arts legend. It's essentially a side-scroller with platforming and stealth elements, but fighting is at the core of the adventure. You punch, kick, jump, roll and combo your way through henchmen and fight with weapons such as nunchucks and staffs that are all extremely useful. There is a nice amount of depth to the fighting that the game offers though, and spamming your attacks isn't always the best way to get through the hordes of enemies that await you, and once you defeat them, they'll usually drop a small health boost that you'll no doubt be thankful for, as they are more than capable of holding their ground as well. Where the game truly comes into its own though are the various stealth missions that are sprinkled throughout the story. Here you'll be using the environment to your advantage as you slowly sneak around and shuffle inside walls as you wait for the enemy to do their rounds. These moments offer up a lot of challenge and require the player to be patient as they work towards completing each, and getting caught usually results in failure, so restraint and taking your time is the main way to succeed. If you're a Bruce Lee fan, get this game, it's really as simple as that, and if you're not and are just looking for a side-scroller to play, then Return of the Legend succeeds on its gameplay alone, regardless of the name attached to it. Godzilla Domination is a beat-em-up that aims to capture the complete mayhem in the films and the various other types of media the franchise is so well known for, and for the most part it truly succeeds in doing so. You have a good selection of the 6 most popular Leviathans, and then you get to wreak havoc over Tokyo and other cities by smashing buildings and your rival to smithereens. The story is extremely simple and is only there to set the gameplay up, which sees a meteor travelling close to the Earth, causing all of the gigantic monsters to go insane, except one, you, and it's up to your monster to defend the Earth and get everything under control again. Each of these monsters come along with their own traits, from basic hits to individual special moves that turn up the heat and give way to some intense battles that look absolutely gorgeous as they play out. When it comes to the fighting, there's one button to punch, another to jump, another to kick, and one to block. There's also a special meter you gotta fill, and you have 3 different specialized attacks for each monster. When the bar is flashing, you can do any of the 3, which are done by pressing the face buttons together. The resulting explosions, lasers, and utter chaos that each fight brings makes playing through the game an absolute blast, and for fans of the source material, there's plenty of nods to the lore and events that you'll likely be familiar with. The most impressive aspect of the game though is the amount of replayability that's packed in. The story mode will only last you about an hour, but it's within the various other options that Godzilla Domination really stacks up. Multiplayer is where the game shines, and with it only requiring one cartridge for another player to join in, it's easy to hook up and play with a friend who has a Game Boy Advance as well. Overall, if you can find it for a good price, then it's definitely worth picking up. Disney's movie tie-in games were generally quite good in the 8 and 16-bit eras, but in subsequent decades they have definitely declined, with very few of them being as good as they were in the past. However, I think that among the few that have succeeded in doing so is Lilo and Stitch on the Game Boy Advance. The best comparison would be to that of SNK's Metal Slug, as Lilo and Stitch takes the form of a run and gunner, and to take on various enemies, Stitch has twin blaster pistols, as well as pineapples that shoot like grenades in Metal Slug, and a variety of angles to aim your weapon with. On top of this, there's a tank-like vehicle that Stitch may enter, reminiscent of the tanks in Metal Slug, and a weapon upgrade that fires harder shots that passes through obstacles are also included. These upgrades make taking off foes a lot easier, but that's not saying it's going to be an easy ride though, as the difficulty seems to have been ripped straight out of SNK's classic shooter as well. To offset this though, there are infinite continues and a checkpoint system that make it easier for the intended audience to get to grips with it, but in all honesty, with how hectic the action can get, I can't see a child being able to get quite far, which is all the better for seasoned players like us, and this aspect harkens back to the Disney games of old that weren't afraid to not hold your hand. Now the game has really fantastic visuals for the Game Boy Advance, with bright, different landscapes, well-designed enemies, and an overall excellent pixel art style that brings all of the action to life on the small screen, with plenty of unlockable secrets and several different types of play that help shake up the gameplay. Lilo and Stitch is a surprisingly solid shooter that any fan of Metal Slug will be able to jump into and instantly enjoy. Darius R is a remake of the arcade original that released back in 1986. There's not that much in the way of story, and it simply amounts to the world is in trouble so you gotta go shoot some stuff, but scrolling shooters have never been well known for their focus on narrative, and instead gameplay is what always takes center stage. Darius R doesn't do anything to reinvent the formula and gets by on providing some tried and tested gameplay that fans of the genre will know and love. It sees you jumping into a ship where you have your standard laser and fly from left to right, shooting enemies, collecting power-ups and defeating bosses. The power-ups can boost your guns, bombs and shields 12 different ways each, which provides a lot of variety to the gameplay and allows you to take on each threat with confidence. It's a good idea to save them up for the bosses though, as this is where most of the challenge of the game lies. They all come along with their own unique attack patterns and designs that makes each of them a real standout amongst the regular cannon fodder you'll find throughout each level. There's about 15 stages in total that slowly ramp up the difficulty as you make your way towards the end, but it is quite a short experience and can be completed in about half an hour if you know what you're doing. What helps spice it up though are various branching paths that you get to choose from as you progress, as well as a single stage mode where you can play through any of the stages you've unlocked for a quick fix. Although the game's difficulty might be enough to turn some players off, playing through Darius R is still a great time, but if you want to give it a shot, just remember that it pulls no punches and isn't afraid to challenge you. Crazy Chase is a reimagining of the Super Nintendo game that released in 1994 and brings along with it several changes and updates that ultimately make it the best way to play it. You take up the role of Kid Clown as you're tasked with saving the princess who's been kidnapped by a space pirate, Dirty Joe. The premise is about as generic as you can get, but when it comes to taking on one of the many different levels that make up the game, Crazy Chase really comes into its own. Much like the name implies, it sees you running away from various dangerous obstacles that litter the path as you run downhill, from banana skins that make you slip to huge boulders and spikes that stop you dead in your tracks. Having quick reflexes is the name of the game, and as you make it through the 16 stages, leaping over hazards and dodging harmful items, you'll more than likely take a tumble or two, but once you've got it down, it's a great feeling avoiding every obstacle in your way and successfully making it to the end with no fails. This wasn't just a bare bones port, however, as although the main game is intact, several minigames were added in that you need to unlock by playing, such as air hockey and whack-a-mole, that serve to add another dimension to the gameplay and give the player another reason to jump back into the game once they're done. This is mainly achieved by collecting one of the several collectibles throughout each level, may that be balloons or coins, which are usually in hard to reach areas and provide even more of a challenge for players who are looking to see everything the game has to offer. Overall, Crazy Chase is an entertaining game that is very easy to learn and hard to put down. Some may dislike the lack of complexity in the gameplay, but Crazy Chase's vibrant atmosphere and easy to grasp playstyle will likely win many over. The Game Boy Advance was home to a surprisingly good amount of fighting games that proved that the console was more than capable of holding its own when it came to providing competent fighting games on the go. From Street Fighter to more obscure offerings like Black Belt Challenge, there was plenty of choice, but one title not many people talk about is a port of Guilty Gear X, and although naturally it's a scaled back version of its home console counterparts, the techniques and basically the entire way the game is played is captured very well on the GBA. Now the game takes place in a not so distant future, in a time where biological weapons called gears are used for military purposes. Perceiving them as a threat, a bounty is placed on their capture, and whoever can fight and defeat it will receive a huge sum of money, and this is where the game kicks off. You get to choose from one of several characters who all share similarities when it comes to basic moves, but stand out from one another thanks to a selection of special abilities that each of them can call their own. Unlike some of the other fighters on the Game Boy Advance, Guilty Gear places a heavy emphasis on attack combos and specials, and you can rack up multiple hits and combos with ease, as the system in place will be familiar to anyone who knows their way around a 2D fighter. The only issue I had playing through it was the severe lack of difficulty, and sure, whilst that's cool for newcomers, veterans will be left scratching their head as to why the decision was made to essentially nerf the AI. In the end though, it's still a great version of the game, and if you're on the lookout for a fighter to take with you on the go, it would still be a great choice. Tokyo Extreme Racer has long been one of my favourite racing series, and the Game Boy Advance version, albeit extremely stripped back in terms of visuals, still manages to capture the essence of the games that came before it. Now what sets this franchise apart from other racing games is that instead of just doing laps around a circuit, the core of the experience lies within the absorbing quest mode, which has you racing around 6 highway loops in search of over 100 different rivals to compete against. It all starts out with you buying a cheap car, and as you win events you earn more money, which can be spent on acquiring new vehicles entirely or tuning up and improving the one you already have. What makes the system quite unique, however, is the way in which you trigger races, as you're free to drive around the city at will to locate these rivals, and once you do, you tap the horn and are thrown straight into an event. This sense of freedom is what really helps Tokyo Extreme Racer excel, and if you're after some more traditional racing, there's a bunch of other modes such as time attack, quick race or free run to jump into, but my personal favourite is the SP battle mode that pits you against another racer, where both players' health decreases and you need to be ahead by the end to ensure your health doesn't deplete first. On the whole, if you've enjoyed its home console counterparts, then the Game Boy Advance version of Tokyo Extreme Racer will be right up your street, and even though it's nowhere near the best racing game on the handheld, it's definitely something worth considering. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was a great reimagining of the series on the PlayStation 2, but not many people know that it also received a port for the Game Boy Advance that hoped to bring the huge adventure to the small screen. Of course, the handheld version is a completely different take on the game due to the limitations of the hardware, but for the most part it made the transition quite nicely, with it taking the form of an isometric adventure that saw you undertaking a huge journey as you travel the kingdom and take your character from their humble beginnings and grow them into an unstoppable force. You get to choose from one of 3 different classes before setting out. You've got the fighter, archer and mage, and although that may not seem like a wide variety at first, thanks to the various abilities and attributes of each of them, they all amount to wildly different playstyles. When it comes to the actual gameplay, it's essentially a hack and slasher that sees you collecting loot and acquiring sets of different weapons and armor that all affect how your character performs in combat. There's a nice amount of strategy to each encounter as well, as the enemies won't just simply walk into your sword or spells and will at times try to get behind you, where running away can be the safest option. Due to the lack of face buttons though, you're limited to the use of one spell at a time, which must be swapped out by going into the menu. This is a bit annoying, especially when you're in the heat of a battle, but it's nothing that completely ruins the flow of each fight. Despite a few issues, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance is still a great little adventure on the GBA, and for fans of the series, it's an absolute must-have. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.